Hello, everybody. This is it. This is the final night of our Kirby Jam 2023 Seek Week live stream. It's Saturday night. This is the 7th night of our live streams. How are you guys doing?
Okay.
Saturday night live stream.
Saturday night live stream.
This is going to get a little unhinged. This is going to get a little unplugged. Seek Safely Unplugged here on Saturday night.
Yeah. So tonight, I'm very excited to say this evening is sponsored by Stone and Magnanini LLP, one of the country's premier complex litigation firms for high-stakes cases, including financial loss, fraud, and infringement, and or breach of contract. So if you have a situation, you could look for Stone and Magnanini Law. They have a lot of experience. They've even been to the Supreme Court with some of their cases. So a formidable firm, and we're grateful for their sponsorship. They've sponsored us for many years now.
If you ever need a preview of Bob Magnanini, like in action, like we've talked about in the past, the Guru podcast that Ginny and I participated in a few years ago from Wondery Media that dealt with James Arthur Ray and the Sedona tragedy. On one of the episodes, I'm not sure which, but on one of the episodes, there is audio footage of Bob Magnanini cross-examining James Arthur Ray. And it is some of the... Like, I often don't think of things that James Arthur Ray, where I hear his voice, I don't think how funny, but that particular clip is pretty great to hear Bob
pretty fun
cross-examining James. I highly recommend it. The Guru podcast from Wondery Media. We love Bob. Great. Hello, Bobby Mags.
Hello, Bob Mag. So yeah, the theme of tonight's live stream is kind of like an interview with the founder of Seek Safely, Ginny Brown, who happens to be my mom as well, and the mom of
you two are related. Like, yeah. I just thought Brown was a coincidence.
I mean, it is a common name. It's true. It's a very common name.
It's a very common name. I mean, were you guys? I mean, Kirby, that was her name as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a whole.
It's all in the family here.
Mind blown.
How you doing, Ginny?
Okay, I've never been really nervous about an interview, but I was very nervous about tonight. I've done a lot of interviews, but I was very nervous about tonight.
Maybe we should have prepared some questions ahead of time to put you a little at ease. We're not going to grill you, I promise.
I have some idea of what you were going to ask me and where we're going. So I just wanted to let you know that my computer is sitting on a massive binder of all the summary notes for the first 6 years of our operation as an organization. So that just seemed fitting.
Mm-hmm. You know? It does seem fitting.
And I have many other more. I should say, I just have many other binders with.
I never connected this, but Glenn, I guess this is where I get my note-taking thing from.
Okay.
Glenn and I often joke whenever we watch like some kind of docu-series or something, or listen to a podcast series for our podcast, I always take lots of notes. And I'll be like, I watched it. I finally watched it, and I took notes too. So,
well, you know, I always take notes with my clients because I listen better when I'm writing.
Mm-hmm.
And when Jean and I attended the trial in 2011 together, we actually both took notes and wrote notes to each other during the trial. That my journal kind of reads like. I don't know, like a fifth grade notebook or something. With your best friend, you know,
passing back and forth.
Comments in the margins. Yes, it was very strange.
It was an outlet because we were given very, very clear instructions not to react audibly in the courtroom. So we were writing notes instead.
I mean, in fact, correct me if I'm wrong. Didn't George get reprimanded for looking at James in a particular way?
Yes, he was reprimanded for looking at James harshly, and then he was reprimanded for shaking his water bottle. And I explained to the bailiff that he had Parkinson's, which is why the water bottle was shaking, and she said, "Well, take it out of his hand."
Wow.
Very harsh. Or leave the courtroom.
I
Okay.
just see all that angst for our book, This Sweet Life, in which I just called one of the lawyers a dick. That was my way of handling it.
That's language from Gene Brown. Oof.
So I think one of the things that's interesting, today in sort of preparing for this, I really did. I went back through our history and my voluminous notes from 13 years, right? It's been quite the journey. But the year of the trial was quite traumatic, actually.
Mm-hmm.
So I was thinking, so before we kind of get into the history of the org and Ginny's involvement with the org, I don't know if our audience knows, like we've referred to the fact that Ginny, both you and George have been psychotherapists for a long time. I was wondering if maybe we could start out with kind of you giving us an overview of kind of your career, kind of what kind of work you've been doing and what kind of work you were doing kind of leading up to the founding of the org.
Okay. Well, the first job I started was as a mother. And then I started reading everything I could about parenting. And in doing that, when Kirby was pretty young, I was visited by a priest who wanted to know if I had any ideas about what a family life hero should do. And I said, well, I think the Catholic Church encourages us to have our children, and then we're left flapping in the breeze trying to figure out what to do with them. And I felt very strongly that the church was a good place for people to learn about their vocation, because I considered being a parent a vocation. So I started reading everything I could, and then wound up creating some workshops for parents in various parishes in Brooklyn. Eventually moved to the Archdiocese, trained others to do similar workshops, a lot of the same content. And that began my career as a parent educator. I worked for the Archdiocese of New York after working for the Brooklyn Diocese. I worked for the Archdiocese of New York for about 17 years doing parenting education. So my background at that point was primarily as an educator, but I knew that to do this work outside the church, I needed professional credentials. So I wound up getting my master's in social work in 1993. So it was actually the year that Kirby graduated from college and Katie graduated from high school. I wanted to get through graduate school before the rest of them. So
it was like a race.
That was my goal. So at any rate, I then by that point, George was doing private practice. And so we started doing some private practice work together. And I worked for the Archdiocese of New York until 2011. And then after that, started working for local agencies here in Orange County. And I worked primarily as their educator for different kinds of programs. So I created and ran an anger management program. I created and ran a program for people who had lost their children, temporarily lost custody of their children because of removal from abuse and neglect. So I had put together a program for that. And so we did a program for kids who were on probation and their entire family to try to help the families reconnect and operate in a good way for that adolescent who was struggling. So a lot of educational programs that incorporated my clinical skills. And then at the time of Kirby's death, I continued to work, which was kind of a salvation in many ways. And a few years later, after the trial, I left that so that I could really concentrate on working for the organization.
Yeah. So, I mean, what strikes me, Ginny, about what you described about your career, even the beginning of your career as a clinician, like here you'd had these thoughts about, I'd like to go into this, and maybe this could be a vocation for me. But your first thought was, man, if I'm going to do this, I really need to get the appropriate credentials and training.
Oh, what a thought.
What a thought. So
I know
even,
I'm smart, but I'm not that smart on my own, that's for sure.
But it's such a contrast to so many of the personalities and the organizations that we deal with in the org, and that Gene and I talk about on the podcast, where the process is very often, I have an idea that this is what I want to do. Maybe I'll just do it. Maybe I'll just, go on out there. But you, again, like even before getting into this work, I mean, you already had this mindset that, look, it's really important. I don't know what I don't know.
Right.
And so it's really important to get credentialed and trained.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I also felt very strongly that when I was teaching, if I was saying something that was my opinion or a good guess, an educated guess, I would clearly state that. I wouldn't put it out as a law of the universe,
Yeah. But, you could have easily just called yourself a parenting coach after having read a couple of books, right? But to be fair to all the coaches out there doing whatever kind of coaching, part of what we like to talk about with Seek, and we like to caution people with, is that you have all these voices telling you you can just do that. And you can just, you have that emphasis on like, look, you don't want to go to school for 2 or 3 years. You want to just start making money right now. And you can make money doing this. And so I think people get kind of caught up in that idea, even when they have good intentions. Whereas, Mom, I think you recognize the longer game, the bigger picture, where it was like, if I'm going to make a career out of this, I need to have a strong foundation to do it properly. And that's something that I think is just so de-emphasized in all of the self-help and like girl boss rhetoric and all of that people just kind of skip those steps. And I think then they end up burning out when they realize that it's not going to work very well. And had they it's unfortunate, because I think a lot of those people, had they gone to school and, done a more professional kind of path into that type of work, they'd probably be good at it,
Well, it's interesting because even this past year, I made a decision to go back to graduate school and get a certificate through the Parenting Institute at Adelphi, because I really wanted to see the current research. I wanted to really look at it, not just pick up books here and there, but to really see what's being talked about in the field. And it was great. And I'm really glad I did. It really, I think, has helped my practice. I was able to update all my teaching boards, and it was a great experience. But I'll tell you, it wasn't easy to get registered in this program, because they wanted references from, like professors I had. And the more I thought about the people I would call to give me a reference, that they're just no longer here because I'm old. it was really funny. I had to get them to like waive that requirement and just look at my resume and say,
Right.
"Can I take this program?" So
Oh.
it was very funny. And I met some wonderful women, a couple of whom we're staying in touch with each other, which is really nice.
Mhm.
Nice. I mean, it really, Ginny, what you're talking about really speaks to one of our core messages at Seek, right? So we talk about people who are doing this type of work that you do and I do, but without licenses and without
Mhm.
credentials and without oversight.
Right.
And one of the reasons why that's so important is not because there's necessarily anything magic about a license, but
Mhm.
if you're going to maintain a license, one of the requirements, as you know, as I know, that one of the requirements is that we have to take a certain number of continuing education
Mhm.
classes
Mhm.
every licensure cycle. We actually have to stay up on the state of the field.
Mhm.
If you've just gone into the field based on the fact that whatever you have a strong inner sense that you'd be a great coach,
Mhm.
there's nobody enforcing any kind of there's no obligation to stay up on anything. I mean, I guess there's no
Mhm.
obligation to get credentialed in anything.
Mhm.
But it's one of the things that really compromises the ability to be safe, because again, you don't know what you don't know. You don't know what assumptions and experiences of yours may not be supported by the current research, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah. So one of the things I think that was interesting about, after Sedona, when we were kind of starting to scrutinize the industry more, we've talked a lot about how your professional perspective gave you a sense of kind of what had happened to the participants. Um, but I think it also gave you that perspective of, look, I'm in this kind of work, and this is what I have to do to maintain my practice, and this is what would happen to me if I had done an event like this and harmed people. And it helped us very quickly see that problem of the lack of any sort of professional structure to the self-help industry, which kind of put us right from the outset on this path of saying, this is a bigger problem than this one specific incident, right? This is an industry problem.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I think the other thing too, Jean, is that Dad and I having professional background helped us to understand that everyone who was in Sedona was traumatized,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
that this was a horrific experience for them. And in understanding that, that was helpful when no one wanted to talk to us,
Mm-hmm.
when it was very hard for anyone who was there. A few people did, a few
Mm-hmm.
brave souls, but for the most part, people did not want to be contacted by us. Even when Dad and I tried to, think about maybe we could put together a resource list for contacts that we had dealing with trauma across the country that people
Mm-hmm.
could access depending on where they lived. And, but there's survivor guilt, and
Mm-hmm.
it's also simply the experience of trauma that if you don't pay attention to it and take care of how it has impacted you, you just want to walk away.
Mm-hmm.
And the impact of that is going to come out sideways in your life in the future, but you don't know yet how.
Mm-hmm.
And Dad and I understood that. We realized that. And even though we wanted to help the people who were in Sedona, we also understood why they didn't want to know us. So
Right.
that kind of was helpful. Because initially, that was very, very hurtful.
Yeah.
That was hard. I wanted to talk to the people that she spent her last days with.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was an interesting thing too, as we kind of dealt with the media afterwards. And still to this
Mm-hmm.
day, I think when we talk to people, they're surprised that we don't just want to talk about, how sad and upset we are. And we didn't even right at the beginning. right? Like that whole Larry King interview was kind of a disaster because that's all Larry King focused on. And we had a lot more to talk about that he didn't even get to. But I think, I don't know if you felt that, but I've definitely felt that when we have had interviews with people, there's a certain, we kind of take them off guard, I think, with our perspective and, you know, kind of like, and that we have an agenda that goes well beyond just saying, oh, we're so upset about this. Have you had that experience as well?
Yeah. And it's been frustrating to try to come off like a rational human being instead of a bereft and crazed mother that I always felt inside. And then not have that aired, because the media just wants the tears. They want the person breaking down. They want the sensational response. So I didn't want to do that because I didn't want to just get written off like, oh, she's just so upset over her daughter. This is not, yes, this happened to my daughter, but I don't want it to happen to anyone else, and it can. So open your eyes. Let me tell you what happened so you can understand. And let's figure out what we can do so that this won't happen to your daughter or you, someone you love. And that was hard for people to just not get that. And a lot of times when we did interviews together, sometimes Dad tends to be more emotional, and that's the clip that they would show. Not that I didn't want him to be shown. That's not the point. But I'm trying to talk about a rational, this in a rational way to look at the bigger problem. But that's not what they wanted.
Yeah. Well, like last night, for example, that clip from Dad is the only one I'm going to keep playing after this. At the very end when he had.
Thank you very much. You just reinforced the point. Dad and I used to give talks together all the time. I did all the work. And then he would get up and say something brilliant or something funny, and that's all people would remember.
I mean, Ginny, what you're speaking to is really something that Jane and I address so often on the podcast, which is that, you know, there are kind of two narratives that you can go with when things like Sedona or whatever Nexium happen. Like, you can either go with the narrative that this was a horrible accident that happened because of, or a bad guy, right? But it's an isolated incident, right? And the media tends to, I mean, they love that stuff. They love, like, wow, look at this weird, incongruous thing that happened. But what, you know, you were saying was that, well, no, actually, like, and I've heard you say this again and again, that, you know, what James Arthur Ray and others don't understand is that this was a logical, inevitable consequence of the way that he was doing business and the way that the industry operates. And that narrative is less sexy because that requires action on behalf of everyone who hears the message. Like, we can no longer kind of voyeuristically look at that one thing that happened. It's now incumbent upon us to say, well, if this is an ongoing thing, we have to, as a culture, take a look at that. And we don't like that. That's hard. That imposes an obligation on us.
And, you know, you said that's less sexy, and that really offends me because I'm a sexuality educator as well. I do sexuality seminars for adolescents and their parents.
I said the narrative is less sexy. I said nothing about any person involved here. But you know, in my mind, so a question that I have, like, in my mind, it raises the question of, so you guys are dealing with this tragedy, and you guys are learning more and more about kind of what actually happened and the factors that contributed to it. There came a point where you realized, well, this isn't just an isolated thing. Like, this is a function of how the industry itself operates. What kinds of things did you learn that helped you understand that?
I think the horrific nature of not being informed of her death. The phone call that James Ray gave me 5 days after her death, the additional information of his behavior at the time, and then finding out that in past years people had been harmed, and he knew that, and then starting to try to find other people and discovering other stories of people who had been hurt, had been harmed, who had lost all their money. Looking at James Shaw's story, looking at Colleen Conaway's story, Liz Newman's story. These 4 people were wrecked. I shouldn't say wrecked, but financially impacted in a way that they were in a hole that they couldn't get out of in some aspects. And then we began to see that this happened with other people as well. And the tactics that were used for the sales tactics and the NLP and just all the different conditioning type stuff, we began to see that this is how it works. This is how you get people to keep coming back to you and spend their money. So, and I did a lot of reading, Glenn. The first couple of years, just a lot of books about the self-help industry, talking to different authors. So I think that also broadened my knowledge of what was going on in the industry, and understanding some of the underpinnings behind this kind of approach.
Yeah, I think there was we all had a lot of curiosity about kind of like, how could this happen? Because I think, last night we talked about Kirby and how adventurous she was and how she was very experienced with kind of like extreme physical exercises and things. So I think it was so shocking that could happen to her, that it was like, there has to be more to this than just this, what we're seeing on the surface here. That, I think we all did. I remember researching, like, what is a sweat lodge supposed to look like? And then very quickly going, oh, that was not a sweat lodge.
That's not what he did.
That was not a sweat lodge. And and then how did you
research the impact of sensory deprivation? You and I did a lot of that in the beginning, understanding that sensory deprivation, 5 days of that would really impact people's mental acuity. And I remember speaking with one of the women who was there, who said to me on the phone a couple of weeks after the event, but James assured us that we would still be able to make a rational decision. And I said to her, but did you? And she couldn't answer me. But, understanding that what they had gone through was going to have some kind of impact on their ability to make a clear, focused, rational decision just wasn't, they had become convinced that, they would be able to override that.
I love that. But James assured them that they'd be able.
That's right.
James, with his extensive history in neuropsychology and like having no idea what he's talking about. Oh, you'll be fine. You'll be fine. I just
right.
So
and the idea that that I understood too, of that willful suspension of disbelief, that there's this feeling that he wouldn't deliberately put us in danger. He's running a business that would blow up his business. He wouldn't deliberately do that. So therefore it's kind of got to be okay, even though I'm not sure, but really, that doesn't make any sense for him to put people in danger. So we know that that's also one of the other things that happens when people are looking to seek change. And, people have often asked me, like, why did we start this organization? And I just remember at the time thinking, Dad and I were coming to the end of our paid employment, jobs where we had paid employment. I mean, I did leave paid employment a couple of years after we got Seek started, but, we were coming into Social Security and small pensions. And so our life was different from the other families. I had done a lot of public speaking. We had the psych background, and we would be able to keep this public, because I felt if we don't keep this in the public eye, people are just going to forget that it ever happened. And I'm not going to let that happen. I'm not going to let it happen that they forget about Kirby, James, and Liz, and that this thing that should not have happened, that was criminal, took place. So we felt that we had the capacity to be a voice, and that with that came a responsibility to become the voice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So when things started, like at the very beginning, so I have a memory of watching news clips of you and George doing press conference with the Sikh promise. And your thought, correct me if I'm wrong, like your thought was like, James was getting out of prison, and your thought was like, man, he could be among the first to take to make the Sikh promise. I've always kind of wondered, I don't think I've ever asked you this. Was it your thought that, like, was there ever any thought in your mind that he would actually go ahead and do it? Like, with everything that you had learned about him at that time? Like, did you think that maybe he would go ahead?
Well, there was quite a bit of discussion about he could just sign it and continue to operate the way he was operating. So people were like nervous about giving him the promise. And honestly, I didn't think he would sign it, but I felt it was a good opportunity for us to be in juxtaposition to his release.
You bet.
That his release was going to be covered, and damn it, we're going to be covered too, because Kirby Brown and Seek Safely is going to haunt this man for the rest of his life. So strategically, I thought it was an important thing to do.
You bet. You bet. What do you suppose, just hypothetically, as long as we're talking about this, I've often thought about this. Like, what do you suppose you would have done if he would have said, sure, absolutely, that sounds like a great idea, I will go ahead and be among the first to take the, because we've always said at Seek that taking the Sikh promise is not a guarantee of anything. Like, I mean, it's a voluntary, thing, and we don't check up. Like, we're not a watchdog organization. But what do you suppose might have happened, or what would your response have been, either publicly or privately, had he gone ahead and said okay?
I think if he had signed it and it was public that he signed it, I would have loved to have done something with him publicly. I would have been willing to do something with him publicly, to talk about, this is a wonderful thing. I'm really thrilled that you've come to the decision that this is the important way to practice. And now let's make sure that you're, all of your followers understand this is what they're entitled to, that this is what's really important. Anyone who signs this, your followers need to know that this is what they're entitled to, and that this is the very least of what they should expect from your leadership. I was asked to go public in a love fest of forgiveness. I was asked if I forgave him. This was I don't know if you remember that, Jean, that phone call out on Long Island. And I can't remember the exact year. But I said, I do forgive him. I do. Because I'm not going to live with unforgiveness and bitterness and thoughts of revenge. I'm just not going to live that way. I don't want to expend my energy that way. But if I publicly went on television saying, I forgive you, people would misunderstand that as my saying, it's okay what you did. What you did is not okay. And I don't trust you because I don't see you thinking differently or behaving differently. So I don't trust you. So I think a public display of forgiveness would be misunderstood because I think people misunderstand what forgiveness really means.
Particularly when he was, I mean, explicitly using Sedona as a marketing tool.
Right.
Like he was really pushing that narrative of redemption.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You bet.
Yeah. Yeah. So in those first few years, kind of when we were starting out with Seek, and I think again, as we were doing this learning, part of that learning was some of the people we connected with early on. So I'm wondering, like, how did I can't even remember how that came about. Like, I think one of the big ones for us right in the beginning was Rick Ross, right? And I don't know if he reached out to you guys or if you reached out to him. Do you remember?
I think I reached out to him, and I met him when he was still working in Jersey. But that was actually, I think, around 2015 or 16. So in the very beginning, I think some of the books that I read about self-help were probably more influential in a way. And we were trying to find people more than people were trying to find us.
Yeah, for sure.
At that point.
Yeah. And there were so few of them. Like I remember there's Steve Salerno's book Sham. I remember that was one of the few ones that existed. And then again, like we knew of Christine Whalen, Dr. Christine Whalen, because we had read some of her articles. But yeah, it was.
So Dad and I met her in Pittsburgh when she was still working in the University of Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
How, out of curiosity, how did that happen? How did you connect with Christine?
I called her because we had read her article in Huffington Post. And so I'm pretty sure I had called her and found out her connection to someone else who had been in Sedona. So we made a connection pretty early. And then within a couple of years of that, we actually went and met her, and she sent me her doctoral dissertation, which I read. I was so impressed. I'm like, oh man, this woman is awesome. She gets it. You know, she really understands. And she was one of the few people from the first person to say, these were smart people who were there. This could happen to you.
Yeah.
So.
I remember you mentioning her in yours and my very first conversation. And that's the thing, that one of the challenges that I know you experienced and you could speak to is that, you know, as you dove into the self-help world, one of the challenges that you found was that there had been so little serious attention paid to it from an academic, from an academic standpoint. It really hadn't been studied in any serious way.
Yeah, I had called Christine to find out whether there was any research being done, because we felt that would have been a good goal for us, raising money through the organization to support research into the industry. And there wasn't any. And I'm like, wow. I mean, we're researching like purple frogs or something. We can't, research this,
Oh, it's purple frogs are very important, Ginny. I don't know if you knew this.
I didn't know that. Yeah.
Come on.
No.
But that,
It's true, though. It's amazing that there's so little research into something that is so much a fabric of our society. And I think there are lots of reasons for that, but it really is just kind of amazing.
It's the old paradox, Gene, that you and I talk about endlessly. This idea that self-help is the biggest section of the bookstore, and yet no one wants to be seen in the self-help aisle.
Yeah.
Right? Like, as a culture, we're so resistant to paying serious attention to this industry, which is one of the reasons why for over 10 years, we've really been the only organization of our kind consistently in this conversation, which is mind-blowing when you think of how culturally pervasive things like the vow, or right, I mean, like when you think, like, people are fascinated when these bad things happen, and yet we're the only organization that has been on message about this industry. It's insane.
Yeah, we were, but that is shifting now, right? Which is the thing I keep telling you over and over again, Ginny, because I know that has been discouraging. And in a way, I think that was part of, that early experience of going to and doing an interview on TV and then them only showing the clip of, the grieving parents. I think part of that is because there was no context for those, media people, the reporters and the interviewers. There was no context for them to place the rest of our message in. It just didn't exist. Like, nobody could really understand those bigger pieces of what we were talking about. I mean, because we can't even define what self-help is, right? That's been one of the basic struggles of our effort right from the beginning, is that you can't even really put a label on this giant thing. Yeah, we all kind of know it's there, but I think we've gotten a lot more open with, as a society, not just us personally, but as society-wide, we've gotten more open with this, the fact that many of us are seeking, and we're, doing self-care, and we're doing meditation, and we're doing yoga, and we're doing these things. Yeah, I mean, people are more open and talking about mental health now than they were 15 years ago.
Right.
So these things are shifting.
When I look back on this whole journey, we incorporated in July of 2010. So within a year, we were incorporated. Gina and I had started writing, doing research, and trying to reach people, pretty much right from the beginning. The trial really kind of delayed our work because we were so constrained with what we could and could not say. And honestly, I was sort of terrified the whole year of 2011 because I didn't want to do or say anything that could have impacted the trial in a negative way. And that was awful. That was really, really hard. And I think I began to realize that the best way to get the message out was just to say yes to every potential interview. Anyone who wanted to interview me, yes. I never said no to any interview, even those that never went anywhere. And I realized that that's just the nature of that business. They're responding to a producer, and they're looking for ratings. And, I gave tons of interviews that never went anywhere, but, it's good practice. I went to the Hay House conference that was in New York in October of 2013 and tried to talk to people all day long because that was a conference of self-help writers, right? I tried to get to Wayne Dyer. I gave a personal message to his daughter. And I love Wayne Dyer. I really do. The manifest the manifestation stuff really got to me. But I was a big Wayne Dyer fan. I mean, I started following him from Your Erroneous Zones. I thought that was brilliant.
Mhm.
So, you know, that there's been so much discouragement in this journey. And Stanley Goldstein, who's been one of our staunchest supporters, Deborah Goldstein's father, and two people who loved Kirby, had always said to me, Ginny, just persist. You will find the right person. And I think we are starting to find the right people to advance this mission. But for 13 years, I haven't felt like a success.
Mhm.
I really haven't. It's been very hard because I feel like I was trying to do a job that I didn't have the skill set for. I had said to everyone from the beginning, I will talk. Give me a microphone. Do not give me a computer. Do not have me set up systems. I don't know how to do that. And every time I tried to get help to do what I couldn't do, they struggled too. So the mission is broad. Many people said it was way too diffuse, and yet we felt the three prongs of the mission were what the problem is. The public doesn't know, the consumer needs good education, and we need to do something to try to impact the industry.
Mhm.
So we continued with that mission, even though it's been a very, very heavy lift, and we were told
Mhm.
that to people. So
You
I
know,
feel,
I
you know,
keep saying that I feel like a broken record with this because I think, in a way, I think back on having had the experience of trying to get people to help us, right? And then they run into the same problems and tire wheel spinning that we had been running into as well. It's not because they weren't the right people or we weren't the right people. It's because nobody else was ready to hear any of this. Nobody
right.
else could understand what we were saying.
Mhm.
There weren't enough other examples out there. And there wasn't enough of an appetite within the industry. I think the kind of democratization of the industry that has occurred over the last few years means that there are a lot more self-help providers out there who have been burned themselves. And so
Mhm.
they know that they don't want to recreate those business practices that are predatory. But prior to that, we were trying to talk to people who were like, leave me alone. I just want to sell my seminars. And I want anybody who's trying to tell me to change how I'm doing my business. So I think there
Or
are a
we were
lot of,
talking, well, I'm sorry, Jean. Or we were
no.
talking to people who just didn't want to think about how they had gotten hurt, and they didn't want to expose it. And then when the Me Too movement came out, I thought to myself, bingo, this is
Mhm.
what's happening in this industry too. I don't
Right.
want to tell someone I was a jerk. I don't want to tell someone that I got scammed, that I got taken advantage of. I just want to move on because this is too painful, and I don't want to expose myself in a public way. And then people who were willing to expose themselves and threatened legal action, we learned
Mhm.
talking to people in the industry that they were bought off.
Mhm.
You know, the practitioners that were very successful were able to buy off anyone who threatened to
Mhm.
sue them. And
Right.
then they were gagged, and they couldn't talk about their experience.
Right.
So even though we met people who had been harmed and I heard their stories, they couldn't say anything publicly.
Mhm. Yeah. But again, like that's all shifting. That's all shifted a lot in the last few years. And I think
Mhm.
in a way that the Me Too movement has been part of that because people's concept of, you know, victimhood and where that kind of puts them has shifted. And I
Yes.
think there's been this sense of being a victim doesn't mean you're powerless.
Mhm.
That you can reclaim some power and control for yourself by pushing back against the people or the systems that harmed you. So I do think, all of these things are aspects of why it's changed, but why for so long it felt like such a struggle. But I always am trying to always tell you that it's not because we weren't doing something right. It's just that the rest of the world wasn't ready for us yet, you know.
Well,
So
I've always
Anne, our friend
appreciated you
Anne,
saying that.
yeah, because I understand the frustration. I understand where it comes from, but it can't be wrapped into this sense of personal failure, because that's not what it was at all. But our good friend Ann Peterson, she's on Facebook watching us. Hi, Ann. She asked, in spite of all that frustration, what did keep you going? It's a loaded question, Ann.
My daughter.
Yeah.
The love and the outrage that she's not here.
Mm-hmm.
I want the world to know her.
Mm-hmm.
She was amazing. And actually, I think our 4 children are amazing. And I think if this had happened to any of them, I would do the same.
Mm-hmm.
Because I have 3 children that are still in the world making a difference. And this daughter who was taken from us, who would have continued to make an incredible difference in the people she touched and the things that she did, are no longer here. She's no longer here to do them and to make that kind of impact. So for me, Seek is an extension of Kirby,
Mm-hmm.
of creating. We talk about the carbon footprint, and I always say we need to look at what is our love footprint. What is our responsible footprint? What kind of footprint are you leaving in the world? Are you leaving it a better place than it was before you got here?
Mm-hmm.
And I believe she did, and I think through Seek she continues.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, and that's what's kept me going. And now I have to be realistic about the responsibilities in my own life. And I think all of us, that's what life is. When things are in front of us, we have to make a decision about how we're going to deal with them and how we're going to respond. And I know I'm needed at home here more now. And my ability to do the work that I'd like to do for Seek is more limited. And I've felt this in the last 2-3 years, that it's not my passion for it flagging, but my physical ability,
Mm-hmm.
time and energy is not where it was. And that's not fair. Plus the fact that I recognize that things have shifted, things have changed. The world is different than it was 5 years ago. And in order for people to see the bigger picture, I feel like it's a good time to get out of the forefront, to allow the kinds of contacts that you and Glenn, Jean, you and Glenn can make by doing a podcast, by being with people like Ann Peterson and Dr. Whalen and others who have, who really understand the industry and understand what's going on. It's now time for that. So, I think you're right. I think we're at a critical crossroads, and that it's a logical time for Dad and I to, to step back, to take care of what we need to take care of at home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So as we kind of come to the end of our conversation, I'm curious about some of your just favorite moments kind of along the journey. Like I can share one of my favorite Ginny moments in the journey. is that so wow, that was impressive. Somebody drove right on by. Someone's interested. So this happened maybe a year and a half ago or so. It was right after I had been elected president of the board of directors. So you guys know, like Ginny for years was the president of the board of directors. I came onto the board, I think probably in 2018, 2017, 2018, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I became board president. This is my second Kirby Jam as board president. But, I'm very often, because I have a social media audience, like I'm very often contacted by people who want interviews and producers and these kinds of things. And I tend to be very choosy about the kinds of media I do. But it's always been great to say, well, so I'm not interested in that opportunity, but there's this organization that I work with that would really love this opportunity. That's how we actually got the podcast going. I'd been contacted, said, do you want to do a podcast? And I said, there are enough white guys with podcasts, but we've been looking as an organization to do it. Anyway, so I'd been contacted by a guy who said he was making a documentary, and he was interested in kind of self-help scams and stuff, and he had done work on like cryptocurrency scams, and he contacted me, and I could and we looked into his background, and I mean he seemed really legit, and he said, I would love to interview you and Ginny Brown. And so I'm like, yes. And I got a head of steam. I'm like, yeah, man, I just got made president of the board of directors, and this is going to be like a big, suddenly, documentary. Yeah. And so I flew to New York, and Ginny and I drove into the city, and we sat for the better part of a day with this guy, and he had all this equipment and stuff. He was legit. Like he had all this equipment and stuff. And we gave like these two extensive interviews. And I remember like his questions to me was like, well, now that you're board president, kind of what's the direction? And I thought this was going to be my coming out party as president of the board of directors. And it's a new day. And I told the board about it, and I was all excited about it. And then time passed and time passed and time passed. And I messaged the guy, and I'm like, hey, what are you going to do with this footage? And didn't hear back. I contacted him several more times. Fell off the face of the earth. And first of all, I was embarrassed because I'd come in so hot to the board of directors, like, hey, we got this thing going on. And now it had just evaporated. But I'll never forget that, Ginny, this speaks to what you were talking about a few minutes ago, where you had said yes to like every interview, even the ones that didn't go anywhere. I did not yet have that experience. And I went to Ginny, and I was like, I am so sorry. We wasted a day. I flew all the way out there, and we wasted this day and whatever. And Ginny was like, you don't even know. You're going to do so many of these that are going to go nowhere. Like, meh. And I'm like, are you sure we did this whole thing? And then, nah, it's fine. Yeah. So I got that moment of education.
And we had such a good time together. That was not a waste of a day. It was a great day.
It was such a good day. No, it really was. It really was. But it was a moment in my learning curve, because I'd never really done nonprofit work before. But it was this moment in my learning curve. I mean, you've been a mentor to me in so many ways, and that was just one more thing. But you were so cool about it. You're like, nah, it's gonna happen.
It happens.
We'll see. We'll see. So one of my favorite moments looking back, I always said that Kirby was the great connector. She met people, became best friends with them like in 2 minutes, and then was there for them, supporting them and being present in their life. Through this, I have met so many wonderful people, you included, Glenn, but so many different people along the way, as we tried to reach out to people, and even people who we've met who haven't been able to get more involved with us or as involved as I would want them to be, but the experience of meeting them, knowing them, We've had many different people come through this house and stay here. Annette McGivney is in the process of writing a book. And we had talked about, maybe doing a book tour at some point, writing the book, meeting Cheryl Benton and the Three Tomatoes. That's been a great experience. So I think for me, the greatest experience of doing this for the last 13 years has simply been the people that I have met, and the ability to create some influence has always been important to me. You can't always judge. Most of the time, you can't judge the impact of what you do and who you are. But I know we've created influence. And, again, in going back and looking through notes, Jean, I found emails from Australia, from the UK, from India. When I think that we have reached people across the globe, Brazil, and even though I feel like, oh my God, I didn't follow up on this person, I didn't follow up on that person, the meeting of them and knowing that somehow we had some impact in their life is fabulous.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been a wonderful thing. It's one of the reasons I'm a therapist, because the ability to walk through life with someone else's journey and with someone else's pain and be a little part of maybe helping them to sort it out is such a privilege.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the same thing.
Yeah. And I think, we say this a lot too. The core message that we try to give people is pretty simple. It's not very complicated. So, we've often had this difficulty as an organization trying to measure our impact. And sometimes I think that impact is really hard to capture because, just the fact that that you touched that person in Australia or South Africa or the UK or wherever, Brazil, they got the message. And that might be all that they needed from us. And it didn't have to be a follow-up, and it didn't have to be a continuing relationship. They got the message, and, that had an impact on their lives.
Mm-hmm.
So we might not be able to capture that impact on a chart, but it exists.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I agree. I think it's really important to keep those things in mind because it's definitely real. It's definitely real.
So I'm really glad I've kept notes, because otherwise I wouldn't remember that.
See, we're back to taking notes. It's all about the notes.
I'm going to keep a clip of Jean Brown saying, so maybe you can't capture the impact of all of our org on a chart for the January board retreat, when the board of directors calls me to account for what the org has done this last year. I'm like, well, as Jean says, I can't really put it on a chart, but the vibes are great, guys. The vibes are great.
It's all about the vibes.
Yeah.
I think that's such a wonderful place to maybe push pause for tonight.
I think so.
I can't.
Can I have a final word?
Of course.
Okay, thank you. Because this is my exit interview. So I think I should be given the final word here.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to say, and this goes to whoever might be listening tonight, that we never know what's going to land in our lap in our life. And we may never be able to understand why what happened in our life happened. But each of us have a responsibility to look at how we want to deal with that, how we want to respond to it, and whether or not whatever has happened, especially if it's something like this, that's so wrong and so hurtful and so egregious, that we're able to approach it with a mission for creating justice, that we're able to approach it with understanding and compassion and hopefully action.
What a perfect place to end. I love that.
Yep.
I love that. I love that. And we love you, Ginny.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
everything you have done, Mom. We have a lot of people who are watching also saying thank you. And yeah, it's we're very grateful for you. You know, I think we're heading into a fun time in a way, I think, for the organization. So I'm sorry that you had to endure through the times that were more challenging, but
I wanted to go to conferences, Jean. I wanted to go places. I was very jealous this year. And I think we should give a shout out to your other two siblings too.
Mhm.
Kirby and Bobby had a big hand in our initial formulation.
Yes.
And then both of them had to make, Bobby was our first board president, and he was
Mhm.
really responsible for our incorporation.
Yep.
And he was the one who pulled Bernie in to help us with our finances. So
Mhm.
a very important person in this journey, and deserves our recognition, gratitude, and thanks as well. And Katie also in the very beginning, helping us to formulate what was going to be helpful, what would be appropriate. And then she made the appropriate decision in her life to concentrate on her two children.
Mhm.
Were her first priority. So I think that's also another message that we've tried to make with Seek as well, is that people have to respond to the priorities in their life. And that's what always comes first. The people in
Mhm.
your life come first.
Mhm. Yep. So I want to say thank you. I want to just leave it at Ginny's final words here, but I also just want to say thank you for everybody, since this is our final evening of the Kirby Jam week of live streaming. We've had a number of people who have been with us pretty much every night, and I'm very grateful to them
Wow.
for their comments. And yeah, it's been really awesome. We're grateful to all our sponsors. I'll put up all their information, who keep helping us have this event year after year in whatever form we do it. And our auction is still going. It will close tomorrow night at 8 p.m. Eastern time. So you can find that on seeksafely.org right on the homepage. There's a link to the auction. Yeah, thank you.
Anybody?
Can I bid on the auction?
Of course. Ginny,
I'll allow it.
Ginny, you told me a long time ago that we will not turn down a donation. So if your first act after stepping back is to bid,
I'm also running the auction, and I know that you don't know how to log into it. So I know that. I promise there will be no shenanigans, because Ginny wouldn't be able to get into the back end of the auction. It's all good.
And anybody watching from my audience, we will go live probably at the top of the hour for tonight's bonus live stream. I want to give a shout out to the folks who have joined me on the Dr. Glenn Patrick Doyle page. So after each of these Seek live streams this week, we've been hopping over to my page, and each night that we've done a live stream, we have raised yet more funds in little increments, and that's something that this whole week has been something we've never tried before. Like, yeah. It used to be like one singular evening, one singular party. So I was really this was another one of my big ideas as board president, of like, let's just saturate everybody with our content. And I'm so happy and grateful with how the Seek content has gone, how the after hours live streams have gone. You guys are absolute rock stars, and I love you. So at the top of the hour, we'll fire it up over on my page.
Awesome. And thank you, all of Dr. Glenn's people who have contributed. I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Wow. I think I'm
Thank
gonna
you.
go. I'm gonna go to bed.
Thank you, Jean. It's been a long week for you. So thank
It's
you
been
for
fun though. It's been fun.
putting us together.
Yeah. Thank you.
Catch everyone on the flip side. Ciao, ciao.
All right.
Okay. Bye.